Well, I'd like to start out by introducing myself. My name's Thomas Lundy. I am the Missional Resource Manager, a staff member at the Presbytery of the Cascades. I have been in this position for a little over 2 years now, and as the Missional Resource Manager, I act as the business manager for the Presbytery and directly handle and work with the Board of Trustees on a majority of our properly related matters, both legal and transactional. So today, for our collaborative conversations, we are going to be discussing leasing church property, leases from the congregational level, and how to go about that process and ensure that you have a smooth lease between you and your potential tenants. So, if everyone can see the screen here, we'll go into the first thing is, why leasing is important, especially at the congregational level. Typically, when people think about leasing, it's often just about bringing in extra income, but leasing your church property has a lot of other effects for both your congregation and the surrounding community that you're a part of. It allows you to not only steward your unused space well, but partnering with the c- community members allows you to create meaningful relationships with them that align with both missions, and it protects the congregation both legally and financially. A good lease is going to support your ministry. It shouldn't just get in the way of it, and we'll certainly be here to help make sure that all of those things hold true. You'll be able to foster trust with the community, foster trust with the members of your congregation, and to support everyone involved in the right way. So when we begin to think about leasing, the question often arises, well, what role does the presbytery play in this? And what guidelines and parameters does the presbytery have when it comes to the structure of leases and how those are carried out? So the presbytery's book of order provides some provides an overview of some of the things that dictate how a lease is going to function. So the Book of Order, it does provide freedom for the congregation in how you use that unused space and how you craft these leases, but it also provides guardrails, especially when it comes to long-term leases, specifically those with outside organizations. So leases that are longer than 5 years, or any lease that involves operating independently of the church's mission, that's going to require presbytery approval. So any lease that is longer than 5 years or that involves sanctuary space needs to be approved at the presbytery level. And while it sometimes feel like it's a bit of excessive red tape or it delays the process, it's mostly about maintaining the structure and ensuring that there's just some oversight in place to make sure that everything goes well. We have some more people. Let me bring them in. Thank you, everyone who just joined us. We're just getting started. We're talking about how the Presbytery's Book of Order provides some guidelines for how those leases are to be structured and how the leasing process will play out. So just to reiterate, if you are considering a lease with an organization or a potential tenant, and it's going to be longer than 5 years, or will include any of the sanctuary worship space, that would require presbytery approval. One of the questions that often comes up in this is, what is sanctuary space? The Book of Orders, according to it, any of the space that is used for worship in your congregation. So that would be the main area of the church where the congregation gathers for worship. So, for example, if you were to lease uh, a classroom in your church, and that lease is just for a year or two, that would not fit the requirements of a lease that needs to be approved at the presbytery level before it can be executed. You're still welcome to reach out to us to be involved in the process if you want some help navigating it and best practices. I'm certainly always able to assist you when it comes to that, but know that there would not be a book of order requirement for that lease to be approved at the presbytery level. So it just included a sample of the text from the book of order that covers what we're talking about. So let's talk about the approval process, because this is typically where questions begin to come up, specifically, how does it work and how long does it take? So the lease approval process, though it does have many steps, it can actually be really straightforward as long as, and it will be more so the earlier we're brought in. So once a lease is being considered, you've identified that tenant that you want to bring in and sign an agreement with, I really recommend right after, as soon as you know that this is something that you want to pursue, to reach out to the presbytery, or namely me, just so that we can begin talking about it early. And then after we know that this is something that you're going to be following through with, we can work on creating a draft lease so that once you have a draft of the agreement, we can start to get the eyes on it in the presbytery that will need to review it. So in order to have that lease that's going to be approved, it's also important to remember that you'll need to have a session vote, and we'll need to see just a signature from your clerk of session that indicates that there was a vote on this and that they're all in agreement. After that, you want to send that to me, and from there, I will handle a large majority of the approvals process. I'll make sure that everybody who needs to see it and review it and ask questions if they're going to have them gets it in front of them in a timely manner. So if you'll see here, the flow of approval for a lease that's submitted to the presbytery is, first, it will go to the property management committee. They'll review it, and then they will recommend it to the board of trustees. Once the board of trustees reviews it, asks any questions if they have any, then it will go to the official approval at the presbytery level. And that can take place at either a membership meeting of the of the presbytery, or a PLC meeting. And the typical timeline for this is 1 to 2 months. And that is simply because there are those three layers, and each of those is going to take place at a meeting, a stated meeting held by each body. So between the property management committee, the board of trustees, and the membership or PLC, you can start to see how those meetings can be scheduled in the span of about 1 to 2 months. So that is why it's so important to reach out so that we can begin it as early as possible, especially if you have a tenant that is looking for a particular time frame or date where they would like to begin their tenancy or move in, or even if they want to start bringing things to the building. The earlier the better is really the best way to go about it. I want to make sure that I am not ignoring. Do we have any questions? All right, so let's talk about the lease. Oh, let me see. Go, Candy.
Um, will this presentation be available to be sent to me so I can see it and review it? Because I'm taking notes, but I'm not a real good note taker.
Absolutely. I meant to mention that I will be distributing a copy of this to everyone in attendance here and everyone who signed up, basically, so that you have the ability to review it on your own time. Absolutely. So the lease template. So the Presbytery worked with an attorney to craft a template for congregations that are going about this to use. And I'm going to actually bring up a sample or bring up a copy of this template so everyone can see it, just so we are, there we go. So this is the cover letter, and this is going to be the template itself. And you'll notice that there are a lot of areas in here that are in brackets. Those bracketed areas of the template are going to be the areas where you're encouraged, well, you need to include the sections that are relevant to your particular lease that you are crafting. And we will discuss that some more as we get through our slides here. So the lease template and what it's for. So as I mentioned, we did have this crafted by an attorney who wanted to ensure that it provides appropriate legal soundness to protect the congregation and the presbytery. And an important thing about the template, I often get questions about particular things in the template that maybe aren't applicable to this certain situation, or you may have some requests from your tenant where they want to adjust some things or negotiate some of the terms of the agreement. And again, you are absolutely encouraged to adjust things in it. It's not intended to be a one size fits all template, but it is there to give you a solid foundation to start from. And another important thing is to remember that based on which state you're in, there's going to be two different templates, and those are going to be on our website, and I've got a link to those documents here at the end. There are some sections, however, of the lease template that I strongly encourage that you do not change. And those specifically would be these three clauses here. And I will pull those up. So the liability insurance, taxes, and damage and indemnity. These are the sections that are very important when it comes to maintaining the protections that are going to be necessary for your congregation. So some of the things that they talk about is the indemnification and liability clause. It's essential for protecting your church from any legal or financial responsibility for the actions of the tenant. So if you change something in there, there could be some unnecessary risk that you take on. For example, I've encountered uh, situations where the actions of a tenant, maybe someone slips and falls while they're there, or something much more drastic could happen. The language in here provides good legal protection in the event that something unforeseen were to happen. The insurance requirements, those make sure that any tenant that you're going to have in the on the property leasing that space has the necessary relevant insurance that is required in the Book of Order. So the Book of Order states that anyone who is leasing property from a Presbytery congregation has liability insurance equal or greater than the insurance policy carried by the congregation itself. And then we have the right to terminate clause. This is one that just protects the church and makes sure that you maintain the ability to sever an arrangement if it no longer suits the need of the tenant or the need of the congregation, not the tenant, excuse me. Nope, excuse me. All right. So the certificate of insurance, one of the things that I often hear is people would like to know what is a certificate of insurance and how do I get one of those from my tenant so that I can send it to the presbytery? So a certificate of insurance is going to be something that the tenant is responsible for delivering to you as the lessor. So you can just let them know, hey, we also need a certificate of insurance naming us as the additional insured, and their insurance carrier is able to provide that for you. Usually they can just reach out to the agent that they work directly with, and it's a simple document that just lists another entity on their policy. So yeah, just to reiterate, leasing, it does have a lot of things that can seem pretty confusing, but primarily it's very doable. And because of the work that went into it on the back end with the template and the fact that, I'm here to help you through any of the questions that you might have when it comes to leasing a portion of your church property, it's important to just begin early and always ask questions and don't be afraid to, say, hey, can I change this? Because outside of just a few of those things that we covered previously, it is very doable. And we also do have a great relationship with the attorney who did craft this. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always available to walk along with you through the process. And I also want to just list my contact information here. This is my phone number and my email address. And right here, this is going to bring you to the page of our website where you can find those documents that we mentioned, specifically the lease template. So now I know folks will have questions, and I apologize for not being able to see the chat while I was screen sharing, but we will just discuss a little bit. And share my screen. Were you not able to see my screen during the presentation?
No.
That
I
you
saw
should
your
make it.
screen. I'm sorry. I
You were
saw it.
able to see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't come through for me. All I saw was you.
I saw the screen. I saw your screen.
Well, John, I'm really sorry that you weren't able to see that. I will go ahead. I'm going to send you a copy of this. I'm going to send everyone a copy when our meeting concludes. And then if you'd like to give me a phone call, I'm available today. We can talk through some of it together. And I would offer the same thing to anyone else. I see that Daryl Eddy, does the certificate need to name the church and the presbytery? Yes, yes. The church and the presbytery should be listed.
Questions. We do that. Great chat.
Shelby, if the lease has already been approved by the Presbytery and you're not renewing it for a term that is greater than 5 years, so if you have a lease that was approved by the Presbytery and you're going to extend it for another year or two, and you're not changing any of the terms of the agreement, you can just send me a copy of it and let me know that this is a renewal of a lease that we already have in force, and that because it's already been approved and it doesn't need to go through the same process. And do tenants need to be nonprofit entities only? It's a great question. So no, you do not need to only, that's not required, that there's nothing on the books that says you cannot rent to a nonprofit, a for-profit entity, excuse me. However, when you are renting to a for-profit entity, I strongly encourage you to sit down with them and talk about the taxes section of the lease, because they would be responsible for any of the property taxes or taxes that the church would incur because of that. So essentially, if you were going to lease to a for-profit entity who is not able to get an exemption with that, you would contact me and we will work through that, because it'd be good to speak with a tax professional that is operating in your area to review any of the tax burden that the church may incur. And we did give a presentation sometime last year specifically about leasing to for-profit entities, and because it varies so greatly depending on the situation, I apologize that there's not much more to be said other than if you're going to rent to someone who is a for-profit, just to reach out so that we can begin to work through how we can arrange the agreement to protect everyone involved as best we can.
What about income tax consequences?
For the income taxes so if your tenant is operating like a business out of the space that they've leased from you, and that none of the income is well, if the income that the church receives from that lease could be considered unrelated business income tax, and that is something that case by case plays out, because we have seen instances where, because it is something that is considered missionally aligned, the church in question still would not be required to pay income taxes on that income, but it does vary depending on who that tenant is.
Thomas,
Thank you.
our church has a facilities use agreement, which allows organizations to rent the sanctuary or the narthex for hours or a day, or for presentation. And I'm thinking of like a recital, piano recital, or we do homeowners associations that have one place to meet for their annual meeting. Do you need to review that facilities use agreement? And because they use the sanctuary, does that require your review?
No, if you already have a facilities use agreement in place for those short-term space uses, like you've mentioned, that would not require it to be reviewed at that level, because it wouldn't be a lease that they're signing.
Okay.
And then Shelby, when we're talking about a lease, is there a minimum time that is considered? What makes it a lease rather than an event rental? Well, Minimum amount of a lease is going to be anytime it's a formal agreement where they're going to be paying you rent on a monthly basis. So typically the shortest lease I've seen for things like this are for 6 months. But if we're talking about an agreement for someone to use the lease or use the space for spot, here and there, that wouldn't be covered under a lease. Anytime you both sign an agreement to say you're going to pay us this much money on these dates to use the space, then it becomes a lease. And is whether something is missionally aligned determined at the individual church level, at the presbytery level? That's a good question. If we're talking about whether or not it's missionally aligned for tax purposes, that's actually done at the state and county level. And if we're talking about if something is missionally aligned for the purposes of whether the presbytery is going to approve it, then that would be something that's determined at the presbytery level.
Well, can we email leases to you for approval, or do you want them mailed?
Great question. You can absolutely email them to me. I'm able to print them out and sign them. I typically just review them digitally. If you do want to mail it in, a physical copy, you can certainly do that. Our address, I will bring that up and put it on the chat just so that no one needs to go through getting on
Well,
Google.
so the leases of the church need to be signed by the pastor, the clerk of session, or the treasurer, or all of the above?
Anyone who is an officer in the organizational structure of the congregation. Yeah, and if I would say the main takeaway that I found for this is to just involve the presbytery as early as you can, as soon as you know that it'll be something that you're considering. The sooner the better. Then that way I'm able to just walk along with you and ensure that the process goes as smoothly as possible. And truly, I've been able to help people and make it a lot smoother. It can be really smooth, but I've noticed that the more we try to do in isolation, the more difficult they become. But when we walk together, things tend to be much smoother and pleasant. Nancy says, could you please review the income received from a for-profit business? So an example of income received from a for-profit business would be, let's say you are leasing to a bakery who wants to use your kitchen and they are going to be selling their products. Well, the income that you receive from that lease is unrelated business income. It could be based on review by the county. And that is something that you would want to connect with a tax professional to, and I could certainly walk through that. And but because they, it's not their goods that are being sold are not income for the church, but the money that you receive from that lease agreement is the church's income that would qualify as unrelated business income. If you have any particular instances that you'd like to ask questions about, I could certainly speak with you about that over the phone. You know, unfortunately, it is something that is pretty complex, so it does require a tax professional or an attorney to kind of get involved at that stage to kind of help us discern what the best steps forward would be if it is a for-profit entity that you're leasing to. And do we have any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information in the chat, so everyone is able to reach out to me.
Tom, this is Nancy at Orinco. I was wondering, we aren't in a lease, we aren't necessarily pursuing that very strongly. We do get inquiries from time to time from other congregations. And I was just wondering if the people online here, how many of them really are in one, or pros and cons that they've experienced, or tips to watch out for, or if we were to ever look into one.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I heard you correctly, you're just wondering if there are pros or cons or things that you want to be particularly aware of if you're considering leasing to an organization. Yes, I would say you want to consider whether or not they are able to get insurance, because they would be required to carry a policy equal to or greater than the policy held by the congregation. So there are instances where someone would like to rent to like a small business or, you know, a small preschool or something, like a local organization, but that local organization may not carry their own insurance policy for their whatever reason internally has led them there. And that can be something that you might work through all of the steps and everything goes smoothly, but you might find out that they simply can't afford to carry insurance. Another thing that I would look out for is, what is their timeline? You know, are they needing to move in soon? That can be something that sort of becomes a roadblock in the process for the potential tenant, where they say, well, we would like to do this, but we really have to get this lease signed as quickly as possible. And then there's also, I would just be sure that early that they are aware of how to secure a property tax exemption. So that is a form that they'll fill out and send to the county. And I've walked the Presbytery's tenants through doing that, but just to let them know that once the lease is signed, if they don't already have their own property tax exemption, if they're a nonprofit, they can fill out that form and send it to the appropriate county once the lease is signed. So just that overall, that they have a sound administrative structure to have people who can sign those documents, get all those forms filled out and handle that. A lot of the times, the smaller community organizations, it's not that they can't do it, but they're nonprofits and they're just running on the strength of their small but mighty organizations, and it can be a challenge for some of these smaller organizations to work through that process. I'm always happy to help them and talk on the phone with anybody who has questions about it on the tenant side as well, but just that they are ready and willing to, in some cases, dig into some paperwork that they may not be particularly familiar with.
Thomas, this is Eileen from Kaiser. The other side of leasing that folks may not think very much about is that we lease to a Hispanic church. We've leased to them for almost 15 years now for no financial payment, but rather payment in kind with services. They do our cleaning and our landscaping and small maintenance stuff. They work with us. It has been the most rewarding relationship, not just financially, but we both view this building as ours together. And so when you look at how you can use your building, think about what you need that maybe isn't money, but rather is services, because that's just been a wonderful relationship for us.
Yeah, that is, thank you so much, Eileen. That is a good point to bring up. While leases can seem very formal and structured, having something like that in place, especially when everything is going smoothly, it strengthens your ties to the community so much, because then you take the role of a trusted figure, someone that can be relied on, and someone that provides and stewards their space to the community, even if it's not just a financial benefit.
Thomas, we have a church that's looking to rent or lease, excuse me, lease the sanctuary on Sundays, but they are not registered with the state of Washington's Secretary of State's office as a nonprofit. And I suspect it's because they are a brand new church. Is that an issue?
That would be an issue, and just in the sense that they would need to have exemption. They would need to have a property tax exemption, or at least begin the process of that. If you want to send me an email, we can talk more about some ways that we might look into that and see if we could make something work for them, or find a way to help them navigate that process.
Okay, I'll be in touch then.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for attending this. I am always glad to see a good turnout for these collaborative conversations, and I do so dearly hope that I was able to at least provide a little bit of insight, or at the very least give you a phone number and email to reach out to when you do encounter some of these questions when considering a lease to another organization in your community. So again, my name is Thomas Lundy. I work for the Presbytery of the Cascades. I'm the Missional Resource Manager, and I am just so thrilled that you're able to join us this afternoon. Wish everyone a beautiful rest of your day. I see the sun has finally come out a little bit here in Portland.